Okay, it is 11:01 and we still have people entering, so I'm just going to start. Welcome and tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. Today, our topic is about the importance of teen sleep. And sleep is important for people of all ages, and today for teens, we're going to talk about how essential it is because it's the most formative period for their development. Given the importance of sleep for brain function, it's easy to see why teens who don't get enough sleep tend to suffer. And we have four amazing panelists today who are going to share with us information about the teen brain and it's the importance of sleep in their well-being. We have Dr. Ashley Michalski, who is a licensed psychologist and clinical addictions counselor with a specialization in assessment psychology. So welcome, Dr. Michalski. We have Ms. Earl, who is a graduate of Valparaiso University, receiving a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Sociology with a criminology concentration. And then we have Dr. Daniels. She is a postdoctoral resident and graduated from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology's Doctorate of Clinical Psychology program. Wow, that's a mouthful, Dr. Daniels. So when people ask you where you went to school, you had to, basically tell them your whole dissertation, correct? And then we have Jason Knolla. He is a licensed mental health counselor, a licensed clinical addictions counselor, and a nationally certified counselor. Welcome to our four panelists. I'm really excited to see what you have for us today. I'm going to be silencing myself in just a moment, and I'll turn it over to you. But before I do that, I just wanted to do a little overview of our schedule for today. We're going to have our panel from 11 to 12, and then from 12 to 12, our actual lunch table time, where we go to breakout rooms where you can eat your lunch, and we'll have some deep thoughts to ponder and questions that we can discuss and try to get to know each other a little bit better. Then from 12:30 to 1, we're going to meet back together as a group, and that's when we can do a recap of our breakout rooms, questions, or just recap from earlier. So I don't want to take up too much of their presentation time, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Michalski and let her get you started.
All right, can everyone hear and see the presentation? I only see a few of you in the corner, but okay, I got a thumbs up. Awesome, a couple thumbs up. So I'm Dr. Michalski. Let me do this real quick. So what we are going to talk today about is just adolescence and rest. So I'm going to give a foundation of sleep in general, reasons for sleep deprivation, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ashley, who's going to talk about why sleep's important, the consequences of good and bad sleep, and then we'll transition into Dr. Daniels talking about some sleep hygiene techniques to help promote healthy sleep, and then Jason's going to finish us off with just talking about some mindfulness and sleep. So when we look at sleep, what makes us sleep, I think it's important for us to kind of understand how we may be different than teenagers are. So there's many factors that play into preparing our body to fall asleep and wake up. So we all have an internal body clock that controls when we're awake and when our body is ready for sleep. So this body clock is typically a 24-hour repeating rhythm. So you might have heard of the circadian rhythm. And there's two processes that control this rhythm. So the first is a pressure to sleep that builds up every hour that we're awake. And this drive for sleep reaches a peak in the evening when most people fall asleep. So there's a compound called adenosine, and that seems to be one of the factors linked to this drive for sleep. So while we are awake, our brain continues to build up this compound. And then while we're sleeping, our body breaks down the adenosine. And then there's a second process that's also part of this internal body clock. And that's in sync with different cues of the environment. So like light, darkness, and other cues And that helps us, and those cues help determine when we feel awake and when we feel drowsy. So for example, there's light signals that go into hit our eyes, and then there's a signal in our brain that's saying, okay, it's daytime. And that's helping regulate our internal body clock. And then as nighttime hits, our body also releases another chemical that's called melatonin. And I imagine almost everyone here is familiar with melatonin. You may take melatonin, or someone in your may take melatonin, and that helps signal our body that it's time to prepare for sleep, and it helps us feel drowsy. So the amount of melatonin in our bloodstream peaks as the evening wears on. And so researchers believe that this melatonin peak is the really important piece of preparing our body for sleep. So then the next part of the cycle is in the morning. So that's when the sun rises, our body starts to release cortisol, and that naturally prepares our body to wake up. So the reason I'm talking about this rhythm and timing of the body clock is because that depends on age. So when we look at teenagers, the reason teens tend to fall asleep later at night than younger children and adults. And one of the reasons for this is because that melatonin is released at a later time of that 24-hour cycle for teens. So their body is naturally telling them to stay up later because that melatonin is getting released later in the day. So that's why teenagers, you may see, want to stay up later and sleep more into the day. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that sleep pattern in a little bit here. So just looking at adolescence and sleep in general, adolescents actually require a larger amount of time of sleep, or a longer amount of time of sleep than we do. So they should get between 8 to 10 hours of sleep, a little bit on the latter side of 9 to 10 hours of sleep. But typically teenagers are only getting 6.5 to 7 hours of sleep per night, and some are even getting less. So just kind of, you guys can chat this or jump on the microphone, but what do you guys see as being most responsible for teenagers not getting enough sleep? What are some of the causes of sleep deprivation or them staying up? Yep, devices, social media, definitely. More social media. No, yep. Yes, all of these are great. Fear of missing out, home problems, technology, yeah, there's everyone that's listed here, mental health issues. There are a ton of reasons why teenagers aren't getting enough sleep. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of go through some of these causes. And most of the ones that you said are the ones that I'm going to be talking about today. So I talked a little bit about this cycle where teens, the melatonin is getting released later in the day or the night. So during a teenager's body, there's puberty hormones shift in the body clock forward about 1 to 2 hours. So that's making them sleepier 1 to 2 hours later at night. So you can kind of imagine teenagers are on almost a different time zone than us. So if it's 11 o'clock here, think of them as being almost 1 o'clock in their body's sleep cycle. So then what happens is they fall asleep later, and then we have these early school starts that don't allow them to sleep in. So they're almost getting this nightly sleep debt can cause chronic sleep deprivation. The other one that you guys said, technology, screens. So when we're looking at TVs, smartphones, tablets, video games, whatever the case may be, it actually releases what's called a blue light, and that has a particular frequency. And so when this hits our eye and the receptors, it is telling our brain and suppresses the melatonin. And we know that the melatonin is very important for us to get that sleep in signal our body that it's time for sleep. So with the screens, it's actually doing the opposite. And one of the researchers, Dr. Van Gelder, said that since he has seen teenagers doing homework on computers, the bedtime has actually pushed back an hour to an hour and a half later since the screens have been involved. Other reasons, schedules, the hectic after school schedules, homework, sports, part-time work, social commitments, all of those can cut into teenager sleep time. Leisure activities, I know some of you just fear missing out, that social schedule, playing video games, watching TV, just keeping them out of bed longer. And then what's happening is creating this vicious circle. So insufficient sleep is causing a teenager's brain to become more active. And then an over aroused brain is causing them less, it's harder for them to fall asleep. So then this circle is happening of sleep deprivation, more active brain, less sleep, and it just keeps circling around. And then research also talks about social attitudes. Someone say something, are we good? Okay, just the social attitudes. So in the Western culture, keeping active is often more seen as value than sleep, or is more valued than sleep. And then I know someone mentioned mental health issues. Of course, anxiety, racing thoughts can disrupt sleep. Depression, you can sleep more than normal, or you can sleep less than normal. And then just sleep disorders in general, maybe restless leg syndrome, sleep apnea. And then this social term called social jet lag. So we're talking about the shifting sleep patterns. So on the weekend, we're staying up, or teenagers are staying up, sleeping late into the morning, and then their body has to reset for the school schedule. So that social jet lag can cause just this chronic cycle of sleep deprivation. So another thing that I wanted to touch on is this pandemic that we've been through, and the shift in just teenagers' lives, adults' lives. And I did not mean to go to my slide already, so I'm going to backspace if I can figure out how. Okay, so I meant to ask you guys before you saw my slide. Hopefully you guys didn't cheat and see my answers, but what impact do you guys think COVID had on adolescents and their sleep in particular? Yeah, so just longer sleep times, definitely. Okay, so negative impact. Yeah, so like most things, the COVID has had its pros and cons when it came to teenagers and sleep. So it actually created this natural experiment of an abrupt shutdown of the schools. So with that actually led to 2 hour typically developing adolescents. So it actually did increase their longer sleep duration, but the researchers in a study that they did during pandemic and pre-pandemic it was actually an improved amount of sleep quality, because they were getting the actual amount of sleep they needed, because they didn't have to be up at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. for the school day. So when they experienced increased daytime alertness and less daytime sleepiness compared to those experiencing like a regular school time schedule. So basically with this, there was a median increase of 75 minutes longer of sleep that adolescents were getting. So if we think about the average of 6.5 to 7.5 hours, and we add that extra hour and 15 minutes, they're falling more into that range of what they need for their developing brains. So it was actually a positive in that way. However, looking at the negative impacts, there were some cons, and are still some cons. Their schedules were completely disrupted. There was more worry. Instead of it being focused on maybe like one area of life, some of the teenagers created this generalized anxiety, which created racing thoughts and more disrupted sleep. So real quick, just some signs of sleep deprivation, and this is going crazy. All right. Daytime sleepiness, trouble concentrating, irritability, need for caffeine, naps, poor grades, trouble sleeping. So those are some kind of cues that you can look out for if teenagers are experiencing this, to focus on their sleep. And now Ashley is going to take over and talk a little bit more about the consequences of good and bad sleep.
Okay, so you might ask, why is sleep so important? Today I'm going to talk a little bit about why there are certain benefits to sleep, sleep is actually a large part of a teen's brain development and functions. And so I'll talk through some of these key functions and their influence on their behaviors. And I'll also talk a little bit about how this relates to teens in a more school setting, but also broader relationally and behavior-wise, and what could be potential risks for that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about sleep being a chance to recharge and restore key functions of our brain. And I'll talk through some of the different parts of our brain and how sleep can actually improve our executive functions or some of our more critical aspects of how we go about maintaining our attention or our concentration or our decision-making skills. Sleep is also a key component in how we use our memory. And so during sleep, we are storing our short-term memory into more long-term memories. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts our ability to retain and recall information as well. Prolonged lack of sleep also influences our emotional health, our mental health, our physical health. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the risks associated when we're not getting a good amount of sleep or enough sleep. And I'll also kind of end with and talk a little bit about our motor functions and how they're compromised when we're not getting enough sleep, and how that can lead to potentially dangerous situations or behaviors. And so I'm not sure, Ashley, oh, thanks for your help. All right, so thinking more about executive functions, feel welcome as I'm talking through some of these symptoms or some of these behaviors and how it relates to teens. Feel welcome to include in the chat some of the difficulties you see with the teens that you work with. And so like I said, when it comes to executive functions, our brain has, kind of thinking more of on a psychology and biology lens, our brain has 4 different areas or lobes that govern different skills and different behaviors. And so specifically our frontal lobe at the front of our brain governs our executive functions. And so that can be related to a teen's decision-making skills, attention, memory, and critical thinking skills. And it also has a big role in our judgment. And sometimes when we're not getting enough sleep, some of these brain functions are impaired or we're not utilizing them to the best of their abilities. And so what you could see with teens is you can see common symptoms or behaviors of, low alertness, difficulty concentrating. So what this can look like for a teen, especially in the school setting, is you can see teens kind of drifting off in class, or maybe they're daydreaming, or maybe they're having a very difficult time focusing. And so you're seeing a lot of flight of ideas. They're jumping from topic to topic. And over time, you can see a decrease in a teen's grades. If they're not focusing and they're having trouble concentrating in class, you can see lower test performance and lower school performance. And also thinking outside of a school lens as well, when our frontal lobe is not getting exactly what it needs with sleep, it can also impair judgment and our decision-making skills, which can be difficult for teens. Teens are more at risk for making poor judgments, or we don't have the ability to assess a situation appropriately, plan, and then make a good moral decision. And so you can see teens giving into peer pressure more frequently, or maybe even experimenting with alcohol or different substances, or simply choosing to engage in behaviors that have a high potential or risk for consequences. Kind of looking more at memory, sleeping also has a big role in how we're storing our memories. And so kind of giving you a little bit of background on memory, there's a couple of sub-processes that are impacted, or sub-processes of memory that sleep has an important role in. And so those sub-processes are encoding, storing, and retrieving information. And so encoding is when we're taking our external environment and we're creating memories, we're obtaining or absorbing what's going on around us. Storing is when our brain takes those observations and stores them into our pre-existing knowledge networks. And retrieving is our ability to access and retain and recall this information. And so actually, while we're sleeping, our brain is playing a very great role in consolidating our memories. So we're moving from our short-term memories and storing them into more long-term memories. So what this can look like from a teen's perspective is if we're getting disrupted sleep, if we're not getting enough sleep, our brain isn't able to properly store those memories or retain that information. And so what this can look like in terms of a school setting, you might see teens being more forgetful and also having increased errors on tests. And this also may induce or exacerbate panic and anxiety. If teens are noticing behaviors, if they're noticing being more forgetful or not being able to perform as well on tests, it could produce, they could lose what they learn exactly, and they could actually be more anxious when it comes to test performance and school performance. And so feel free to put in the chat if you're seeing with the teens you're working with, are they reporting any of these difficulties related to school? Sounds like some can relate. Thinking more on in emotional health or more from a mental health lens, sleep has an important restorative function in recharging the brain from day to day. And so when this natural rhythm is disrupted, it could lead to major changes in your mental health. Examples could include depressed mood, anxious mood, irritability, chronic fatigue, alongside those more critical functions of forgetfulness, making mistakes, slower thinking processes. And so this can lead to more mental health concerns as well. Research is showing more of a circular relationship between mental health and sleep. So when it comes to mental health disorders, there are several mental health disorders that have sleep as a criteria, whether that be difficulty sleeping, sleep disturbances, insomnia. Some mental health disorders have that as a criteria that mental health professionals use to diagnose their clients. And so we're seeing more of a circular relationship where not only do mental health disorders play a role in sleep, but also we're seeing that poor sleep is more of a predictor of these mental health disorders, or can actually induce or exacerbate these types of other symptoms such as depression and anxiety. And so a study of nearly 28,000 high school students found that each hour lost of rest was associated with a 38% increase in sadness and hopelessness, and also a 58% increase in suicidality. And we also see the same when it comes to anxiety as well. It's more of a circular kind of relationship too. Anxiety can increase sleep disturbances. When we're anxious, our minds are racing, our body is in a state of hyperarousal, and that can cause us to have more difficulty sleeping. But it's also the same is true to where sometimes we are having difficulty sleeping and that exacerbates anxiety. On a relatable note, I'm sure all of us have had those situations where we're going to bed and we know we have an early morning and we are having some difficulty falling asleep, or maybe we just have too much energy. And we're thinking in our heads, okay, if I fall asleep right now, I'm going to get 6 hours of sleep. If I fall asleep right now, I'm going to get 5.5 hours of sleep. And so you're seeing more of a circular relationship between anxiety symptoms causing poor sleep disturbances, but the other way around as well. One study found that problems with sleep was a major predictor in generalized anxiety disorder in teens and kids ranging from ages 9 to 16. And so we're seeing sleep having a major role in predicting or even being a risk factor for some of these mental health illnesses. It sounds like some of you guys can relate. This can also lead to conflict in relationships as well, or thinking more of a relational lens. When we aren't getting the right amount of sleep and we're not having that time to regulate our emotions, that can cause relational difficulties. We might be more moody, we might be more quick to temper, we might be more aggressive, we might make decisions that might impact our relationships. So on a teen, thinking about teens, it could severely impact their peer relationships and also their relationships with their family members as well. Extreme irritability as well. So thinking more from a school standpoint too, with teens, if they're getting poor sleep and they're waking up feeling very low energy, very fatigued, that can increase their amount of absences at school. And if it gets to a point to where they're missing so much school that truancy is involved, that can create an additional stressor as well if the school has to step in. And so there's a lot of external things or stressors that can be associated with poor sleep. Thinking more about physical health, there are several risks that we come into or think about when it comes to a lack of sleep. And so when we're not getting an appropriate amount of sleep, this could be an increased risk for physical health concerns related to heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, obesity, diabetes, and inflammation. So thinking more about heart disease, when we're sleeping, sleep is involved in healing and repairing our heart and blood vessels. And so while we're sleeping, our blood pressure is also reducing as well. And so when we have broken up sleep, or if we're not getting enough sleep, it can result in higher elevations of blood pressure throughout the day. And also that mixed with hormones such as cortisol, kind of like what Ashley was describing a little bit earlier. If we are not getting enough sleep and we're not allowing those hormones to regulate, that could pose an increased risk for heart-related conditions, high blood pressure, and stroke. And also thinking more from a weight standpoint, it's shown that those that sleep 8 hours a night tend to have the lowest BMIs or body mass indexes than those who sleep 6 hours a night. And you might ask, why is that the case? During sleep, our bodies secrete hormones that are responsible for maintaining appetite or suppressing appetite in our metabolism as well. Those hormones are called leptin and ghrelin. And so when we're not getting enough sleep, we're disrupting that process of how those hormones regulate throughout our body. And also thinking about insulin, when we're sleeping, our body is regulating our insulin levels as well. And so that poor sleep can lead to fluctuating insulin levels, which can also lead to an increased risk of weight gain and diabetes. Thinking more from inflammation, during our sleep, our body also releases a protein called cytokine, and those proteins help protect against inflammation and infection. And so sleep deprivation can reduce the production of these proteins and antibodies that can aid against fighting against viruses and the common cold. And so not only are we at more risk for getting these viruses, but we are also at a risk for prolonged recovery time as well. Last thing I wanted to touch on was slowed reaction time. And so our frontal lobe is also a key component in our fine motor skills. And so when we're not getting enough sleep, we're also experiencing differences in our reaction times, which can be pretty dangerous, especially as it relates to teens. If we have slower physical reflexes, and if we are noticing more clumsiness, that can pose a risk when it comes to sports performance. You know, if teens are feeling pretty fatigued and their reaction times are slower, that could relate to more injuries when they're participating in their sports. And also it can pose a real risk when it comes to drowsy driving. Teens are already at an increased risk while driving due to lack of experience and distractibility. And so this poses a really great risk for them. It also shows that drowsy driving occurs the most at the middle of the night, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., but also in the mid-afternoon, 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. And that's typically when teens are getting out of school. And so they can really be at risk for some dangerous situations. And it also shows that when we are driving fatigued or drowsy, it could be equivalent to what we experience with alcohol consumption. Studies show that when we're driving after being awake for 24 hours, it's comparable to a blood alcohol content of 0.10, and that's above the legal limit of intoxication. And so teens are really at risk for not only just injuries related to sports, but also can be at an increased risk for very, very dangerous situations related to driving. And so I'm going to hand it off to Jasmine so she could talk a little bit about what to do with this.
Thanks, Ashley. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what sleep hygiene is, and then some tips and things that you can use to help teens have a better sleep hygiene overall. So what is sleep hygiene? What does this word mean? And so sleep hygiene is simply just the habits that individuals have that help them to have a good night's sleep. And so this includes a good bedroom environment and also daily routines that promote that consistent uninterrupted sleep. So a lot of times when we think of sleep hygiene, we think of just that time, you know, when we get ready to go to bed, or the hours leading up to it. But actually that whole sleep hygiene kind of starts and you're during the whole day. So having some healthy habits during the day, stabilizing your sleep schedule, comfortable bedroom free of disruptions, and a relaxing pre-bedroom routine are all a part of that ideal sleep hygiene. So Ashley M talked about kind of indicators of poor sleep hygiene, that's sleep deprivation. And so it's that daytime sleepiness, if they're having difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, frequently waking up, kind of tossing and turning, all of those are kind of indicators that they have a poor sleep hygiene. So looking at some tips and techniques that will help improve that sleep hygiene are looking at what are those pro-sleep habits that you can implement during the day. So planning for 8 hours of sleep in your daily schedule. So this is something, especially with teens, that they may need help with kind of going, kind of starting and learning how to kind of set up their daily schedule, with they've got lots of things going on with sports and just their school schedule and social events. So help with them kind of developing that schedule, saying, okay, if I have all of this to do and I need to wake up at this time, what time do I need to start getting ready for bed, or kind of put into my schedule so I can make sure I get that at least 8 hours of sleep that I need. And then a next habit that we can have during the day is maintaining that regular sleep and wake schedule. So trying to stick with the same time that you go to sleep every night, as well as what time you wake up the next day. That gets a little tricky on the weekends because teens want to sleep in and sleep later into, that Saturday, Sunday. And like Ashley said, then they're trying to reset on Sunday, which is very difficult for their bodies to do. And so on the weekends, trying to stay within that sleep wake time as close as you can. So maybe with an hour or two within their normal sleep time and their normal wake time will kind of help with them being able to monitor that sleep and stay within that kind of healthy sleep zone for them, even on the weekends. And then that exposure to light immediately when they wake up in the morning. So most people don't want that flash of sunlight when they first wake up, but that actually helps with kind of, as Esther's saying again, that light signals. It kind of wakes up the brain, gets the body going, lets them know that it's time to wake up, and actually helps with them waking up, but also helps with them being able to go to sleep in the evening time when it's time for bedtime. So that immediate exposure to light, whether it's sunlight or bright light, is really helpful to kind of promoting sleep in the rest of the day. And then naturally avoiding the caffeine and energy drinks. I know a lot of teens are probably drinking a lot more coffee, a lot more energy drinks, and snacks that have caffeine in it. So being able to monitor that, but also kind of having a cutoff. And so when it gets into the evening, definitely, and even later in the afternoon, kind of limiting that caffeine and energy drinks so that it doesn't impact their ability to fall asleep as they get into those evening hours. So they can have it, but kind of shortening it so it doesn't linger on into the later parts of the day. And then taking afternoon naps. So this one's kind of controversial. There's different research that kind of looks at yes to naps, no to naps, and kind of where it falls. Most research kind of says that if you're going to take naps, limit it to no more than 30 minutes. So that 15 to 20-minute nap early in the afternoon can prove to be beneficial for them, but avoiding that, 4, 5, 6 naps or naps after dinner, because then that's going to impact them being able to fall asleep later when it's actually time for bedtime. So keeping those naps to 15, 20 minutes and having it early in the afternoon when it can. And then is another important part of helping to promote sleep throughout the day. And so getting at least of activity throughout the day so that they can kind of not tire their body out, but you think of like little kids when you want them to run in the park and be tired. Kind of the same idea with teens, with getting them to be active and busy throughout the day for at least 30 minutes. And avoid doing any activity that 2 to 3 hours so that it doesn't, again, impact that being able to fall asleep. And avoiding large meals before bedtime. So that kind of goes into that scheduling and planning again of when is the best time to kind of have that dinner time so they're not going to school on a full stomach, so that that digestion is not happening while they're sleeping and potentially interrupting their sleep cycle. So avoiding the meals before bedtime. And then avoiding alcohol and smoking. So we know kind of with vaping and things like that, that unfortunately teens are kind of getting into some of the more smoking. So being mindful of that and kind of not wanting them to do it, but also making sure that it's not happening near the bedtime as well, because that can impact their ability to fall asleep, but also affecting their ability to wake up in the middle of the night. The second part is that bedroom. And so keeping their bedroom cool, keeping it dark and keeping it quiet so that they are able to go to sleep. So that means removing kind of the light. So that's where the TV, the tablets, the phones, the computers, all of those things away from their environment in the bedtime. in the bedroom, I'm sorry. And then also with their lights, their windows, being able to either use shades or blinds or something that kind of blocks out that light so that it doesn't keep them awake when they're trying to fall asleep or wake them up throughout the night. But then also having a comfortable mattress and pillow that helps with the sleep. I know there's lots of different pillows out there that help with different kinds of sleep, whether you're a side sleeper or a back sleeper, but having a pillow that's conducive to them and helps them to have the best sleep. And then using the bed only for sleeping. And so making sure that they're not doing homework in the bed or using the bed as a couch, and they're using it only for sleeping, because that helps to signal to the brain and to the body that when they're in the bed, that it's time for sleeping and not for doing other activities as well. So avoid that as they can. And then the next slide is we're looking into that pre-bedroom routine. Ooh, one more back. There we go. Excuse me, it's looking into create that pre-bedroom routine. And so this is what happens before they're actually getting in the bed to go. And so a part of that is starting right away and preparing for the next. So getting book bags together, getting clothes laid out and doing all the things that allows you to be ready. So you're not rushed in the morning. You don't go to sleep feeling that pressure of, oh, I have all these things to do to get ready. And then they can also sleep until they absolutely have to get up. And so they don't have to allow all of this extra time to get ready in certain ways, because they've already done some of those things that they can do in the evening time to get ready for the day. And then beginning that wind down process about 30 minutes to an hour prior to bedtime. And so this includes taking a warm bath or shower, which helps ready the body for sleep, changing into pajamas, brushing your teeth, all of those things. They kind of go into getting the body settled and signaling to the body that it's time to go to sleep. And then a big part, which I know you guys mentioned in the chat, is the electronics are getting in the way. And so at least 30 minutes to 2 hours before bed, kind of cutting off all electronic devices. So phones, tablets, TVs, all of those things that kind of reactivate the brain, kind of shutting those off at least 30 minutes before it's time to go to bed. And I know that may be a struggle with teens and things like that, but kind of setting, helping parents to kind of set those schedules and kind of set those parameters so they know that this is what's going to happen. And so they don't have that extra activation before they go to sleep. So, and then putting that on do not disturb. So a lot of phones have that feature where they can turn it off so that the alerts don't come through, which is another part that disrupts the sleep, because if they're getting alerts throughout the night or they're anticipating getting alerts throughout the night and the phone is buzzing or dinging, then they're continuously waking up. And so being able to put away the electronics, but also putting on do not disturb so it doesn't interrupt the sleep throughout the night. And then something else that came out in the research was the use of aromatherapy scents. So scents like orange blossom, chamomile, the lavender scents can help again with that signaling to the brain and the body that it's time for sleep, and helping to promote sleep throughout the night and staying asleep. And then engaging in relaxing activities, such as reading a book or magazine, doing like stretches, like yoga, doing meditation or mindfulness activities, which Jason's going to go over with you guys shortly, but all those things that kind of help relax the body and kind of slow things down. And then setting an alarm to remind you of that sleep routine. So if the bedtime is 10 o'clock, setting that alarm at 9 or 9:30 to let you know, like, okay, now's the time to start that pre-bedroom routine, especially with the possibility of getting wrapped up in homework or maybe watching a movie. And so you can kind of get sidetracked or taken away from when you should start. So having that reminder set that lets you know, like, okay, now I've got to start the pre-bedroom routine. And then the last one for me. There we go. Is ways that you can kind of help teens understand and develop this good sleep hygiene. And so there were some studies that showed having kids participate in this sleep promotion program. And a part of those sleep promotion programs was that education piece on good sleep and the negative consequences of poor sleep. So just talking with teens and helping to educate them, the things that Ashley E talked about, all of the positives and good things that good sleep promotes, but also the negative consequences that can happen when you don't have enough sleep or you're not getting the sleep that you need. And then educating them on what good sleep hygiene looks like. What are the things that they can do that will help them to have good sleep hygiene. And then education on relaxation techniques, things that help to relax the body that they can use daily throughout the week to help promote sleep. And then doing a sleep journal and dream journal. And so with the sleep journal, research has shown that it helps to helps with the distractions, helps in overthinking and worrying and all those things that may be going on for the teens before they're going to sleep. That allows them to kind of have a place to get that out and promotes them being able to fall asleep faster. So these can be preset prompts of things that they're going to talk about, kind of what time they went to bed, relaxation techniques that they use, things that they went on during the day, intentions they want to set for the next day. And then they can also include the next day, how much sleep they got, how they felt when they wake up, and they can kind of compare, days or weeks at a time to kind of see things that were different and look at ways that help promote better sleep on some days more than others. And the dream journal kind of goes along with that, kind of a neat way and a fun way for them to kind of chronicle their dreams that they have and maybe look at how the dreams are impacting their sleep. Maybe some of the nights where they had dreams that were concerned with worry or concern about certain things, they notice those things and kind of talk through that day and journal through that day. And then the last one that could help with promoting sleep is teaching adolescents time management skills. They do have a lot going on with school, some with working, and then with sports and extracurricular activities after school. And so teaching them those time management skills that will help them to get the sleep that they need. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jason.
Okay, thanks, Jasmine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness first, and then get into mindfulness and sleep. So these techniques, the mindfulness techniques, there's a whole bunch of different things that are lumped into the term mindfulness, but it really helps to get an overview of what those mean and how to practice those and the effects of each specific practice. So mindfulness in general, I kind of want to do a sales pitch for mindfulness. It can help with so many things. Research has shown that it helps with pain management, reduction of anxiety, depression, increase of executive functioning, like impulse control, concentration, critical thinking, things like that. So it really, it can help in any of our functioning with our brains. But specifically for sleep, this is very personal to me. My daughter is 13 years old and has struggled with sleep for years. But when she got into the preteen years, it was way worse, way more intense and more difficult for her to sleep. So we've been through this very personally. And everything that has been listed in this PowerPoint, we've tried. We have tried everything with our daughter. So I will tell you, don't get your hopes too high, because you can be perfect as a parent or a provider in providing all this information. It does help. There will be improvement, but nothing fixes it 100%, especially during the teen years. But it definitely has improved my daughter's sleep and symptoms, and really just an empowerment. If teens have techniques that they can use for sleep hygiene, some information, and some techniques like this where they can change the state of their own minds, they become empowered. Now it doesn't feel like it's just happening to me. Now I can do something about how I feel and the way my mind is functioning. So I really recommend any of these for sleep. Also, what I've learned as a provider with these techniques is that not one size fits all. My daughter has a certain temperament, and that's her. But now I've had many clients with different temperaments, different ways of thinking and behaving in the world. And the same thing that works for my daughter doesn't work for another teen or another teen. So different temperaments need different interventions, meaning some people are very academic, very heady, mind racing about projects and class issues. Some are more socially oriented, some are more physical, some are lazy, some are creative. So a different technique will be better suited for different temperaments and personalities. But not only that, different techniques are better fitted for different days. Some days you need one of these techniques, and then the next day you need a different technique because something different is going on, either in your life socially, mentally, emotionally, hormonally, things change all the time. So for us, as if you're a parent or a provider, it's helpful to know the different tools and experience them personally. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what these are. But really, if you want to be an informed provider, you have to at least try experientially to understand just a little bit about what each of these are, so you can recommend and point towards different techniques. With that said, the best way to experience these is experientially is to look into recordings. I recommend just go into YouTube and you can look at recordings of all kinds of different mindfulness techniques. But there's great apps. Every single client that I work with, I recommend apps, especially the teens. There's an app called Calm. It's fantastic. There's an app called Headspace, very good. There's an app called Insight Timer, very good. Those are just 3 and they're fantastic. But what they have is guided meditation. So you don't have to just read it and figure it out yourself. You can just listen to somebody guide you through the steps and go through that experience yourself. Or just tell your teens or parents that these are great resources. So check those out, highly recommend it. So this is something that I'm going to start kind of on my list now that I've done my intro here. The first bullet point here is a very important thing that I learned kind of the hard way with my daughter. I have practiced and taught mindfulness for many, many years. So my daughter was having sleep issues. So I'm like, oh, all right, I got that. I got the fix for that. Here's meditation techniques. We're going to teach you these. We're going to practice these together. Problem solved. No problem. Okay, well, that didn't work. What I found out was she settled and then issues bubbled up and she couldn't sleep because she needed to process certain things. So what I learned is there has to be some sort of a pre-sleep dialogue or journaling, a processing of what's going on. And it needs to be an ongoing habit. So if you have a teen that's more open emotionally and verbally, that could be a pre-sleep dialogue. You know, I would recommend an hour before bed, doing your best. You know, you can ask a teen, how is it going socially, academically, and you get fine, fine, okay, fine. So it takes some practice to get a dialogue going where there's some opening, to get them to open up, or even have them be aware of what's really bothering them in a deep way. Also, there's privacy, so journaling may be better because they may not want to share with everybody or anybody what's going on. It's just an intervention to do our best to try to get to the issues for expression. Only after those issues have been expressed and addressed a little bit can mindfulness, the next step, really deepen. That's what I learned kind of the hard way. So now let's get into some of these techniques. As I said, mindfulness itself is a catch-all for many different techniques. In a nutshell, mindfulness means focusing on the present moment on purpose with non-judgmental awareness. That's the best description, definition I can think of for what this is. So paying attention to the present moment on purpose, that the first part of this is because we do pay attention to the present moment, sometimes kind of on accident. It just happens. Just through our day-to-day or accidentally, we're caught by something in the present moment that captures our attention, and we're riveted, we're present. But it sort of just happens to us. So a practice of mindfulness is making it happen on purpose. The second part is with paying attention to the present moment on purpose with non-judgmental awareness. And this means that we could be present in the moment and still kind of resisting. Present, but wishing the present was different. So there's either chasing after an experience or pushing away a negative experience like pain or an emotional discomfort. So if we if we do that, if we do this paying attention to the present moment on purpose with non-judgmental awareness, that can describe a lot of different activities. So the first one is cultivating focused, spacious awareness through the breath. So that's just a breath meditation. So if you were going to look on YouTube or look on one of these apps, you would just put in breath meditation. You can also look for the term insight meditation. That's another one. It's the same kind of thing. And it's very, very simple. I'll kind of describe what this does and how it helps for sleep. So cultivating focused, spacious awareness through the breath just means, in this case, teaching our teens to focus on the feeling of the breath as they breathe, instead of where the mind can go in all these different directions. We would help them practice to stay with the feeling of breath. Now, this is not trying to speed the breath up, slow the breath down, deepen the breath, or shallow the breath. It's just noticing the breath as it is and coming back to it over and over. And through that, we are focused on the feeling of breath, but also spacious to the surroundings around us. Meaning, we could be very focused on a detail in the moment. Like if you imagine you're doing something very detailed with your hands and very focused on a model or something in front of you, using your fine motor skills, zoned in, and somebody walks up behind you, taps you on the shoulder, you might like jump up. Oh, I had no idea that they were walking up on me. That's very focused attention. It's good, it's concentration, but it's not relaxed and open. So this kind of technique is trying to help our teens to be focused and present, one breath at a time, but relaxed and open. Relaxed vigilance instead of contracted, concentrated, tense. So you can see it's kind of a different state of mind. And I'm just giving you an overview. It's hard to describe any of these because these are an experiential state of mind that I'm pointing to. So in order to understand what I'm saying, you'll have to go and kind of practice this for a few minutes. If I have time at the end, I'm going to run you through a very brief experiential breath meditation. All right, but I'm going to move on to two other techniques that are very, very important. And I'm just checking to see if there was a question here. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is body scan and progressive muscle relaxation. So this is particularly important with sleep because I'm sure every one of us has experienced this. You can be laying in bed, and on one hand, some nights your mind races, and you can't sleep because your mind is caught up on either something anxious or important, or sometimes it's just nonsense. It just races, keeping you up. Other times, you can be totally quiet in your thinking. Your mind can be quiet, but physically, you're awake like it's the middle of the day. The mind's not even going, you're just awake. These two techniques are to help to get the body shifting. So we can quiet the mind through focused, spacious awareness if you practice enough. It centers the thinking into an experience of the breath, and it calms the mind. But even after you calm the mind, the body can be revved up with the hormones of the day, the stress of the day. You can be revved up and just wide awake, but very quiet and relaxed. That's helpful, but it's not helpful for sleep. These two techniques are two different ways of relaxing and shifting the body from a more sympathetic nervous system to a parasympathetic nervous system. Meaning, instead of stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, ready to go, relaxation and rest and lowered heart rate, lowered stress hormones. So the body scan is scanning just what it sounds like. It's scanning throughout the entire body using our awareness. So at any given moment, we're aware of our bodies at times, but not totally. So as I'm talking, you're probably listening and not really aware of your feet or your legs or your back, unless they hurt. Then our attention's kind of drawn to them. We may be aware of a part of our body for a moment, and then our attention wanders. We're not usually aware of each part. The body scan is just using our awareness to go part by part through our body, not trying to change the way our bodies feel. It's just being aware. So in a body scan meditation, you work by being aware of the toes, the feet, the ankles, the legs, all the way through to the hips and the back, the chest, the arms. You go through the entire body, just piece by piece, without trying to change anything. Remember, the first thing I said was focused on the present moment with non-judgmental awareness. That's what this body scan meditation does. It's just scan as is. But something happens when we do that. Just by scanning and feeling into the body shifts to being more relaxed and mentally more let go and restful. Again, don't just take my word for it. Go ahead and search body scan, click on YouTube, give yourself a break and experience that body scan and see what it does for you. The next one is progressive muscle relaxation. It's similar. You go part by part through the body, but you're doing something slightly different. It's more physically active. So you would go into each part of the body and tense that part of the body and let it go. So you'd go into the feet and tense them up, let it go. The calves, tense them up, let it go. And either one is totally fine. Again, it's a temperamental issue. It's a physical issue. It's a unique thing for every person, whether the body scan is better or whether the progressive muscle relaxation technique is better. So if you're working with a teen for a while, you would want to introduce both. You'd want to practice one with them, practice the other with them, and ask them, what helped you let go? What helped you relax? Just do kind of an experiment with them. The next one is breathing technique. This is different than the first. The first one, if you remember, it was a practice of following the breath, the feeling of breath with non-judgmental awareness. And just by being aware of the breath, the mind sort of settles. Let me look at the question real quick. Absolutely, this is doable with groups, whether it's whatever kind of group gathering you have or classroom. It's best if you do guided at first with especially younger folks, but then once they have it and they can do it on their own. Guided is best. They can just kind of listen with their headphones. So the breathing techniques here, they're different than the focused spacious awareness through the breath that I was describing. Breathing techniques means you are trying to change something about the breath. You're trying to deepen it or slow it down or lengthen the count of it. There's many different techniques with the breath. Very powerful, especially for anxiety and panic, which can get in the way of sleeping. So in a breathing technique, you would teach your teen to count their breaths. There's things like called box breathing, so you can look that one up, or you can just count the inhale and count the exhale to get a nice even breath. And oh, fantastic. Awesome. And you can also, there's different types of breathing. I have a recording on YouTube. If you look up my name, Jason Canola, and the 5 breath technique, it's a specific type of breathing technique where you change how you breathe, sometimes through your nose, sometimes through your mouth, sometimes in through the mouth and out through the nose, changes all over the place. That one specifically is good for teens that tend to be high achievers, anxious, panic easily, usually have sleep issues. But it gives the mind something to concentrate on, but also relaxes the body and helps let go of tension. So breathing techniques means anything that we're doing with the breath on purpose to change the rate or depth of it. So there's lots of different ones, and I won't get into every single one of them. The last technique I wanted to talk about is guided imagery. Now, this is really good for kids that have an active imagination. They could be creative, but not necessarily. You can, if your teen, for instance, can creatively come up with a lot of anxious forecasts, if their mind is very active with, doomsday forecasts of anxiety, that's an active imagination. A guided imagery meditation can use that imagination that usually causes issues with anxiety for something positive. So you can help your teen to start to train their imagination to imagine safe and beautiful environments. So the classic one is to like envision yourself on a beach in the Caribbean. You're hearing the waves, you're seeing the seagulls, you feel the breeze. That's a guided imagery meditation. Now, it could be anything you want. I find that it helps to get it very personalized. When you're working with your teen, find out where's their safe space, or where do they wish they could visit? Is it Hawaii? Is it the forest? Is it their backyard? Wherever it is, it doesn't matter. It's being able to go to that place in your mind on purpose. And doing that, you relax the thinking, you quiet the thinking, but you also relax the body, which makes you more ready for sleep. So, like I said, a big overview of different kinds, but in order to really be ready to share, just do a 5-minute experiment, a recording of each one of those. That way you know what I'm talking about and what it feels like. Then you can recommend it to your teens. And I don't know when I'm supposed to be done. Do you know how much time I have here?
I think we are at time. I don't know
Cool.
if Donna's back on.
Yeah, I'm here. We're actually right at the top of the hour, so we're right on schedule. If you have just a couple more things that you wanted to add, we can certainly give you the time. Otherwise, we will take a break, let everybody gather their lunch, and we'll go into breakout rooms. I missed the very beginning, so I'm not sure. Will the panel be sharing their during the breakout, or are you taking a break and coming back to Q&A?
I think Jason has to head out, but the three of us are available to be a part of the breakout groups.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we will go ahead and take a quick 10-minute break. Everybody gather your lunches. When you come back to your computer, you should see on the screen an invitation to your breakout room. Please go ahead, join that room. I'll do a little bit of switching around so that we don't have a room with like 2 people versus a room with 8 people. So you might get bounced a time or two once I see where everybody lands. And the idea is to talk about the things that we've heard today. What a lot of really great information. Each of our panelists brought something very unique, necessary to the conversation. So during our breakout time this afternoon, we will talk about what we heard, what our takeaways were, how as frontline staff or those who work with and or live with teens might be able to utilize some of this. And I think a question that I had for myself, which I'm curious to see who else thought of that, recognize themselves in some of what we do. As adults, sometimes our mind race and we have too much caffeine late in the day, or, our schedules are crazy busy, and one night we get 4 hours of sleep and the next night we might get maybe if we're really blessed, get a full 8 hours, right? So I'm curious as to how this might carry over into the adult world. So 10-minute break, we'll come back, move into breakouts, and we'll see you back in just a few minutes. All right. So let's go ahead and just start with table 1. Who is our spokesperson for table 1? I think Dwayne
We
and
didn't
Deb.
really discuss who's gonna do it, but because we were doing it in the chat, because Marion's baby's sleeping.
Oh, well, that was very considerate of you. But Devin, you've been voluntold,
Yes. Yes.
so go for it.
So we talked a lot about how to kind of how to relate changing screen time over into a bedtime routine. So on the iPhone, at least, I don't know how it is on Android, but on iPhone, you can actually set a reminder for weekly. So mine's Sunday morning at 9 o'clock to see how much screen time you've had that week. For the past 2 months, my screen time has been down percentage every week. So kind of translating that into the classroom of, maybe even making a competition and tell people, hey, this time next Thursday, we're going to set the alarm to go off and let us know who had the biggest time change in screen time that week, and maybe have a prize for them or something. And from that, you might see a better result, because most of the screen time probably comes from bed, laying in bed, scrolling on TikTok, thinking it's 5 minutes, but it's really 5 hours. So we talked a lot about that and bedtime routines and stuff like that.
Oh, that's great. Anything to add to that from the team? All right, how about table number 2?
I can volunteer to do it. We also didn't discuss who would do it. So I'll step up to the plate. I'm really talkative. So we spoke a lot about how like struggles with other aspects of our lives that get in the way of sleep or force us to prioritize other things. Like a lot of people at our table had pets and kids and spouses and other, responsibilities, which make it difficult to prioritize sleep when it sometimes feels like sleep can sometimes feel like it's like not giving up. That's not the word that I'm trying to say, but you're like, okay, I'm going to go to sleep, and it feels like you're not doing something.
Not productive time.
Right, exactly.
Like it's a luxury is kind of how we were talking about it.
Yes. And yeah, we also were, some people shared which tips they found to be the most, the biggest aha moment. And I think a couple of people mentioned the mindful meditation. And we were offering tips for each other about how to deal with some of the other struggles that are happening with like conflicts between teens who are struggling with sleep, either sleeping not enough or sleeping too much, which also was a detriment to their well-being.
Absolutely.
Was that a good summary table too?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that
Yes.
we're all recognizing ourselves, right? In the need to be better attuned to what our sleeping habits are. So this was definitely about teens, but kind of like I said right before we went to break, it's obvious that many of us on this call who are not teens, it was probably a good reminder for us, you know, when we don't get the sleep that we need, our brain's a little foggy, we get a little more irritable. All those things are true for us as adults as well as it is for teens. And so are we showing up for the teens that we're serving the best that we can if we're sleep deprived? So kind of a different perspective. And yeah, sleep is not a luxury, it's a necessity, right? I think maybe we should all put that on a sticky note and stick it somewhere. Stick it somewhere. It's an important part of self-care and health, mental and physical health. So, okay, table number 3 is the one that I dissolved, I believe. So table number 4.
I'll go. We had 2 leaders in there, but we talked more about kind of the pandemic and how that shift is happening of going back into school and the school time starts, and how it seems that maybe more kids are sleeping during class and there's more of a lax because of that. And then just the morale at school being a little bit different and conflict. I think Catherine was talking how she's in a middle school, and her kids are staying late at night just with conflict in social media, and then it carries over into the school day. And we talked about how the lack of sleep irritability is increasing, and then there's this social media conflict that's carrying over and just creating more disruption during the school day. So, and then if we do advocate for like a later school time start, would that even make a difference? Because teenagers might shift and say, oh, I start school later, so now I can stay up later. So kind of just going back and forth discussing that. I think, and I'm not sure if I missed anything, Ashley or Jasmine.
Do you think that teens have gotten used to being able to take those naps throughout the day and sleeping in chunks of time that are, you know, for that 2 or 3 hour nap several times throughout the day instead of really getting a long period of rest and allowing them to get into that cycle? Do you think that's happened over the pandemic with them being home for 2 years and, you know, doing schoolwork as you want, and parents may or may not be home and they're kind of left to their own?
I was talking a little bit about that. I specialize in seeing teens for therapy, and a lot of the teens that I was working with throughout the pandemic would log on to school or log on to class and turn their video off and take a nap during class. And so I've been wondering how much of that was creating habits that were hard to train your brain to do otherwise while they started to go more in person.
So I don't want to miss, I see there's conversation happening in the chat. I don't want to miss it. So adjustments on family time, I see Sandy talking about. Aviva, you want to share what your comments and your thoughts?
Sure, just in response to the question that you posed, I'm thinking back to when I was in high school, and I would come home from school and I would be so tired, I would literally fall asleep on the floor right in front of my front door because I couldn't even like bring myself to go to bed. So maybe it was a bad habit that I created, but I also feel like there was no way, you know, when I got home from school, I couldn't function without sleeping. So I think sometimes it's like not necessarily a choice that they're consciously saying, okay, I'm going to choose to nap now, or I know I can stay up late because I have a nap. But sometimes it's like, you know, getting up at 6:30 in the morning and getting like 6 hours of sleep as a teen, it's rough, you know? And I was like, I'm not going to be able to do my homework or do anything else unless I sleep right now.
I see Jasmine's talking about social media having a higher priority than their schoolwork. You know, in their minds, it's more important what others are saying and what others are doing than focusing on that schoolwork. And we've talked about that in some of the other sessions that we've had, and you know, the effects of social media on our young people and on us, if we're really honest. I know I've been guilty more than once. I'm not a big TikTok person, but every once in a while I'll get caught on just looking at things, and sometimes it's just not even stuff that's important at all. I don't know. And I think I've been on for 15 or 20 minutes, and next thing it's been like an hour and a half. And I'm like, what a waste of my time that just was, you know, when I have a to-do list that never gets all the boxes checked. So anyway, okay, I think we had one more table. Did we have one more table? Maybe not. Oh, Sandy, power naps are underrated. I think that's different, right? I agree with you, because if I'm very purposeful and I know I'm going to lay down and I give myself, you know, I'm going to take this 20 minutes, but when those 20-minute naps, when you ignore the alarm when it goes off and it turns into a 2-hour nap, that totally messes you up, right? So if you're intentional and purposeful, I agree with you, they can be great. But when you ignore that alarm and it turns into a 2-hour nap, it messes up the whole rest of your day. And I feel I've done that, right? I wake up like disoriented, like, oh my gosh, where am I? And what time is it? And how long have I been asleep? And then you're off cycle, you know, the whole rest of the day or the evening. So we have just a few minutes left. I will open the conversation for any questions for our speakers that maybe you didn't get to ask in your breakout rooms, or that you've had as a result of our conversation here in the last few minutes. Any questions? Via, just feel free.
All right. Yeah, I did have a question, because so I know this webinar is about teen sleep, of course, but as a chronically sleep deprived person, I was watching with myself in mind. And one thing that I struggle with, that I think, you know, I've heard also is a not uncommon struggle, is turning knowledge into action. I learned about this concept like revenge bedtime procrastination. So like, as an example, I used one of the tips, like I set an alarm for myself to start getting ready every night. And then every night when it would go off, I would just ignore it. And it's like, I want to get a full night's sleep. And I know that it's bad for me to not, and I know like what I could be doing. And it's not an issue of falling asleep, but going to bed is the problem. And I was wondering if you had any tips for like people who know what they should be doing, but have trouble actually implementing those tips.
I'll jump in, and then Jasmine or Ashley, if you have anything, jump in. But I think one word that you said that sticks out is what you should be doing. And so what my mind goes to is what we call a cognitive distortion of like, we have these should, I ought to, and it creates this ambiguous thing of like, well, I should be doing this. And if I don't, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person, I need to do this, and so forth. So what I would suggest is setting maybe more realistic things of what need to be done and what I want to get done, rather than what you believe you should get done. So I know probably most of you are familiar with like SMART goals. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. So when you're kind of thinking of all the things that you need to get done through the day, the next day, make it a SMART goal, rather than this, I should be doing all this. Because I could think, like personally, I have probably a list that never ends of things that should be done in my house. And if I went through that list every single day into night, I'm never going to sleep. So make a realistic, maybe to-do list, things that you want to get done. And then do that. And hopefully some of that completion can help slow your mind down a little bit.
And it might help to kind of along with Ashley said, kind of changing your idea of like, okay, I should go to sleep, so I need to do all these things, and looking at it as maybe a time for you. So part of that pre-bed routine is kind of looking at as, okay, I get to, take a warm bath, I get to light a candle, I get to, maybe read part of a story, do a relaxation technique, and that kind of takes you into the sleep. So kind of changing that from the, oh man, I gotta go to sleep, like I have to stop working, like it's kind of your me time that you kind of get to do some self-care for yourself before you go to sleep.
So I'll just throw out there that my husband is one of those people who could like go on 3 or 4 hours of sleep forever. But as we've gotten older, he's noticed that he's not as nice a person the next day, and for sure by the end of day 2. And so accountability became the thing for him. And we just agreed that I would say, honey, I love you, but I won't like you tomorrow, and it's time to go to bed. So so for us, it became an accountability thing where I could just remind him of the need. Not everybody's fortunate enough to have a partner that they're going to bed with every night, but I do. But, that doesn't mean you can't have an accountability partner outside of your home even that would say, Aviva, I really care about you and your mental and physical health. And you asked me to be helpful. So I'm reminding you that it's 10 o'clock. And you need to stop. So really, just like when you want to do anything, sometimes you need that accountability or that someone to remind you of the reason. And it's not the things that you should do, but it's what you really need to do. It's a need for your physical well-being. And I think that's the part that we miss, right? Because if you were a diabetic and you needed insulin at a certain time, you would take that insulin. Or if you were, if there were some other ailment and you needed something. And I think that's what we need to recognize with rest is that it's a need. Our body needs that rest for healing, emotionally, physically, all of that. We need the rest. And so it's not selfish. It's not a waste of our time. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And I see Jasmine has her hand raised, and then there was a question from Marion that I want to make sure we see regarding a nightlight. And I know she's putting it in the chat because she's got a baby sleeping. Our question is, if a nightlight is needed or wanted, do you recommend a certain color? They're using red for their kids.
So to be completely transparent, I'm not sure the research on the color of the nightlight. Jasmine or Ashley, do you know off the top of your head? Okay, so I guess the advantage of being on televideo, you can do a quick Google search and looking at some research. That red orange often promotes the melatonin, but there's also another study that's looking at if it's a preferred color, there is a shorter time amount to fall asleep. So if whoever is choosing their own color, they fell asleep faster than a white light, a random non-preferred color, or just straight darkness. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but I would say the red to orange, and I can also send a follow-up to Donna after I do a little bit more research to give some more information on that.
Perfect.
So in regards to the light, I've actually looked into that quite a bit, and that like amber color is considered one of the better, but also blue and purple. But it definitely, I have found in experimenting with my kids and myself that it is also a color preference. So one child has purple and she falls asleep much faster that way. I use a salt rock, which gives off an amber coloration and allows me to put essential oils on it as well. So but those colors don't wake us up or disturb us. And then we use a certain wake up so that the tones gradually come in, and there's a light that gradually comes on to brighten the room at a slower pace than just dramatic.
Right, a lot of really great information. And this is a subject that has been on our evaluation list for a while. Different people have said, let's talk about sleep, let's talk about sleep. So I'm glad I could finally bring this. And I know our numbers were a little low today, but it's spring break, which I didn't consider. I might have altered the date of our webinar a little bit if I'd have thought that through. But we will make sure that the recording gets out to all of our regular participants. And speaking of evaluation, there will be an evaluation along with that recording. Then you'll get that in the next, I would say, week to 10 days, because I don't know if I'll get it done before Friday, and then I'm on spring break. So, but there will be a survey. It's just a handful of questions. And one of those questions includes, what other topics would you like for us to talk about? So please take the time to do that. Again, I thank all of our panelists today. You did an amazing job, some great information. I'm sorry I wasn't here at the beginning. I missed the first couple of minutes, but I'm going to listen to the recording again because I think there was some information that I missed. And I know I have a few parents that I'm going to be sending the link to. And it will go on our website as well. So again, to all of our panelists, I thank you for your time and your expertise in sharing with us today. Well done. To all of our regular guests and my staff, thanks for being here today. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.